This is All Access with John Samuel, and this is a show where we share the stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and advocates and how they're improving the lives for people of all abilities. Today, we have the pleasure of having Lori Samuels, my dear friend and also advisor, and no relation, but she's also the accessibility director at NBC Universal. And I'm super excited to be sharing her story and how she got into accessibility and some of the cool things she's doing now. So thank you, Lori.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much. You know, Lori, you and I have had the opportunity to get to know each other over the past couple of years now. And, you know, I'd love to learn a little bit more about your background, because I know you went to the very first high school in the country and would love to kind of hear how you got started there.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Boston in the 1960s and 70s, so I've been around for a while. And I went to the oldest public school in the country. It was established in 1635. It was called Boston Latin School, or is called that. Used to be an all-boys school. In fact, my oldest brother graduated in the last class that was all male. And then became a co-ed school. It's an exam school, but a public school. So you pass an exam in the 6th grade to get into the school, and it goes 7th through 12th grade. So my brothers and I all went to that school and graduated.
Okay, very cool. So after that, you know, after kind of finish up high school in the Boston area, where did you go to college, or what did you do afterwards?
I did. I went on to Boston University, and math was my favorite subject in school, which I didn't consider strange at the time. And my father actually encouraged me to switch my major from math to computer science, which I did, and you know, learned programming languages and operating systems theory, and I actually really loved it all, and did a lot of programming and coding. And I actually ended up getting my bachelor's and my master's degree in computer science in a 4-year time period. So that was great. I came out kind of well prepared to get into the field.
That's pretty impressive, Lori. You know, so Lori, during like the time when you were going to college and grad school in computer science, you know, what was it like being, you know, was there a lot of women in computer science at that time? Or
no, definitely not. You know, I'd say with a couple, you know, I probably had a couple of girlfriends in the computer science department, and really probably the rest were mostly guys. I happened to, you know, get along with everyone really well, so I never had any issues. I never personally felt like I encountered anything that held me back gender-wise. But, you know, so I've had a great experience all through my career in terms of working with both men and women, but certainly in terms of numbers, the number of women in the field is a lot smaller percentage-wise. And the thing that troubles me a bit about that is that it's actually, the percentages have actually gone down since, you know, we're talking in the 1980s, and it's actually smaller percentages of women going into the field, which is discouraging.
Yeah, that's really surprising. I had no idea that the numbers have been going down. You know, do you have any ideas on why you think so?
I'm really not sure what the root causes are for that. I would say, you know, it's possible there seems to be some, you know, social pressures around girls not being encouraged to go into STEM careers. And of course, there's a lot of good initiatives to counter that pressure if that is one of the factors. So, you know, I actually participate in you know, some nonprofit organizations that focus on getting kids, in this case, Deaf Kids Code, which is an awesome nonprofit organization that I've been working with for a while, that's focused on getting the deaf community and deaf kids into at least exposed to the possibility of having careers in science and technology. So I think lots of similar efforts are underway for girls as well.
That's very cool. Yeah. No, I'd love to, you know, I know that you've got this connection with the deaf community working on with the Deaf Kids Code, but how did you get into the accessibility space in general, or did you go in right after college, or kind of?
No, actually, it's a great question. I think, you know, I consider myself a passionate ally of the disability community, and I think that passion kind of came from my own personal experience. I mentioned that my brothers and I went to Boston Latin School and we went to Boston Public Schools. My sister, who has cerebral palsy, was not actually even given that opportunity. So my sister Karen, had to go to a different school. She didn't get to go to public schools like the rest of us did.
Oh, really?
She went to a school, and it's actually a horrible name, so I'll say it, but just be aware that this was back in the 1960s. It was called the Industrial School for Crippled Children. That was the name of her school. And as bad as the name sounds, it was, there were wonderful people who worked in the school and awesome teachers, and we were very connected with the school as a family. But I think I was always aware from a very young age that my sister faced many more obstacles and much more discrimination than my brothers and I experienced as we went about our way growing up in childhood. And so that was just ingrained in my DNA as a child.
Yeah.
My sister went on to get her associate's degree, her bachelor's degree, and her master's degree ultimately in social work, and worked, and lives independently and worked in hospital administration. So, she's great. But every step of the way, there was always something that was in the way for her. And we as a family, always supported her very much. And we tried to make sure our family was a kind and safe place for her to be, because she faced discrimination out in the world. So that I think was my personal, initial connection to disability. Awesome. And I also love technology. So it was fairly early in my career that I began to do some work. This is actually moved out of Boston and over to San Francisco, and was working for a company called Broderbund Software, where we're building software products for the consumer market. And I, at that point, got interested in how we could make sure that those products worked for everyone, including kids who were now in the 1990s beginning to go to public schools, kids with disabilities who might needed some different technology to make things work for them.
Oh, that's very cool. That's really interesting that you got started kind of really in the beginning of your career, thinking about access for everyone. That's really cool. So after that experience, kind of where did that take you from there?
Yeah, so it was a really interesting time. This was probably 1993 to 1998. I was the director of engineering for Broderbund Software at the time. The product that I worked on primarily was a product called the Print Shop, but there were others as well. And it was there that I started going to conferences like CSUN and Closing the Gap, and working with some companies that were building assistive technology, like alternative kinds of keyboards and tracking devices that in particular, this was kind of focused on the school and educational market. So I really just kind of try to start bringing this awareness back into my engineering team and to the leadership in the company, and they were fully supportive. It was pre-internet, it was pre-WCAG, none of those standards existed at the time. But the idea that if you developed your software to meet certain standards and not make assumptions that people could use a mouse or could see the screen, that you would be more compatible with these assistive technology devices. And so that was the sort of advocacy. It's been fascinating for me to see over the span of my career, going from Broderbund and Microsoft were the only two mainstream companies that used to go to CSUN and these sort of disability-focused conferences back in the early 90s. And that, of course, has changed so tremendously. And now there's a focus on accessibility, which is awesome. And I've gotten the opportunity for the past 10 years or so in my career to pretty much focus exclusively on accessibility, which is fantastic.
That is really fantastic. You mentioned the receptiveness of the organization to think about, even before the guidelines were there. What do you think it was about the culture that allowed for that?
That's a great question. I would say that I think Broderbund as a consumer software company at the time was very focused on creating wonderful, quality experiences for adults and children to enjoy either in the classroom or at home. And so they were so committed to quality, to really rich, beautiful, engaging, wonderful, software products. And that I think they just perceived accessibility, at the time as just part of that quality measure. And so I think that's one of the ways that I do try to work with teams to look at it, is to say, accessibility is a part of the way that we can measure quality. Is everyone having a good experience with your product? Is everyone able to enjoy your website? Is it really usable?
Oh, that's pretty awesome. That's really cool to actually start your career in an organization that had that kind of culture, because I think that really sets you a good foundation for where you've gone. Because I know you've worked with some big names in your career, and I think that in your career, you mentioned Microsoft. I know you worked for Intuit, and you worked in the accessibility space for 10 years. Kind of, what are some of the major lessons you've learned through those those experiences?
Yeah, well, I'll talk a little bit about kind of going back to when I was a technical program manager at Intuit. I basically volunteered to start up their corporate accessibility program at the time. This was in 2011. And so this was kind of my re-entry into accessibility from having done different things and taking a break to raise 4 kids and a few other things along the way. But in any case, when I was kind of back in the workforce in 2011, I joined Intuit, and which is also a fabulous company that's very committed to quality and innovation in their products. Again, because I was interested in accessibility, I volunteered to start that. And that was a great learning experience for me. We got the opportunity to work on many products, but the one that I probably feel most proud of is that we really leaned into working on QuickBooks, which is a small business accounting software that's widely used by both small business owners and people who are like bookkeepers and accountants and et cetera. So there had been a lot of ask from the blind community, specifically around QuickBooks, and we were able to start an initiative and get executive support for that, and just make a huge amount of progress in getting the core features of that product to be accessible to people who were visually impaired. So we felt really good about that.
No, that's very cool. There's a couple of things I want to kind of follow up on. You mentioned you had that gap, raising the kids and coming back in. How was that re-entry? How was your experience getting back into the workforce?
Honestly, it was, I was very nervous about it at the time. Very much felt a lack of confidence in going back in, particularly because I had been in technology, and there's so much emphasis on staying current in technology, and I think I undervalued probably the skills that I brought to the table at the time in terms of just organization and people skills and various other things that counted for a lot, as it turns out, but I didn't feel confident at the time. So it was a for me personally, it was a challenging time. Once I had gotten back into it for about a year or two, I certainly kind of regained my sense of confidence. But it was I think it's a rough transition to kind of re-enter the workforce after some time away. But it worked. I'm glad it did.
That's great. Yeah, for sure. And, you mentioned that you volunteered to kind of lead up this initiative. And if I'm not mistaken, isn't Intuit like the Lean Startup book is about? Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Okay.
Scott Cook is the founder. I actually knew Scott Cook personally, and he's a great guy. And yes, they're very much about design catalysts and innovation thinking and lean starting. They very much embrace that model, and they have at least they did at the time. I'm sure they probably still do. They have a concept of really getting close to their customers and watching their behaviors and trying to kind of use that information to develop deep customer empathy. So again, accessibility was really in line with their corporate core values, and often is, frankly, in most corporations that I've worked with. On a positive note, accessibility is very well aligned with, if not, sort of an integral part of their core values. But sometimes again, the practice of it is just competes with some other business priorities. So it's just important to have someone owning and driving it and helping the organization to make progress and do it better over time, so that we're not, so that we're making sure that everyone is included.
That's awesome. I think, one of what it sounds like, you've been really just blessed to be able to work with a lot of customer-centric companies. Is that a true statement?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. I think, certainly Microsoft is another example of a company that just completely and thoroughly embraced accessibility in such a big and substantive way. And, for their CEO, Satya Nadella, to be speaking as frequently as he does and as passionately as he does about the importance of inclusive design and making sure that their products truly do empower every person on the planet to achieve more. That is not just a slogan at Microsoft. They do live it and breathe it, and it was wonderful to be part of that. It isn't, I don't want to paint a picture that says that I've never encountered obstacles along the way and people who are not as fully passionate and embrace the idea of accessibility. I have,
yeah.
But those are, fortunately, I think the trend is in the right direction, and I think that companies are beginning to also understand that embracing inclusive design, embracing disability inclusion, and practicing it is actually really good for business too. And so there's this is nothing that we need to come to the table, we shouldn't have to try to convince them, because there really is a solid business case for disability inclusion on so many levels.
That's awesome. I love it. And now you're, the accessibility director at NBC Universal, and you're actually getting, it's a whole different kind of another very customer oriented business. And kind of how is it coming into the entertainment space?
Well, it's exciting for me personally, because this is a new industry. I have not been in media and entertainment before. I come obviously out of the tech sector, and so I understand software product development. I think that from the experiences I've had so far in the last few months, the product teams are wonderful. I've had great engagement with the website teams, the mobile app teams. One thing that's sort of new for me is learning about how the apps that work on your smart TV at home, and learning about that space on the technical side. But I think it's very interesting. There's a lot of opportunity, I think, in media and entertainment to do disability inclusion in on a different scale and in even more expanded ways. So you're thinking about movies and TV and news stories and representation. I'm not as directly involved with that side of the business right now, and we're doing some of the fundamentals in accessibility, but I think it's really fascinating that there is opportunity to represent, and of course we're seeing that as a big issue now in terms of race as well. But disability needs to be represented, and not in just the narrow ways that has historically been in film and television.
Yeah, that's very cool. I think it's, when we think about accessibility, I think we think about work often, but I think entertainment and life is also a critical component that we need to make sure that everyone has access to. And that's really cool that you're doing.
Yeah, and absolutely. And of course, news is part of that as well. So, the importance
correct.
of information being accessible to everyone, especially in times like these where we have, important information coming from public health and science and social justice causes. So it's always critical to make sure that information is accessible to everyone, just as table stakes.
No doubt. But, as we kind of think about the future of accessibility, what are some of the trends or things that you're really excited about?
Yeah, I think there's some interesting trends going on. So one of the trends that I was able, kind of aware of at Microsoft in particular is artificial intelligence and its role in potentially providing some of the solutions and innovations that can happen in the accessibility space and the disability space more generally. So, applications, mobile apps like Seeing AI, which uses the camera on the mobile device to recognize objects in the real world, and to make, for someone who's visually impaired, to be able to kind of have a richer experience and be able to kind of utilize that technology. That's just one example. There are certainly lots of others. So I know that Microsoft is investing in AI for good, AI for accessibility. There's some wonderful initiatives going on in that space. That's one of the trends, sort of a general trend. Another is just, I think that companies, larger enterprise, at least from what I can see, is are really accepting. There's not as much resistance. There used to be a lot of resistance to accessibility. Why do we have to do this? And and there was a lot of time spent justifying why it was important. And so I think that there's less of that now. I think there's an acceptance of, okay, yes, we need to do this. That's right. This is part of what we do. And some companies might look at it through the lens of compliance, like privacy, security, accessibility, you got to do all that stuff, but at least it's becoming more table stakes. The other thing that's amazing to me is how much the accessibility community has grown as an industry. We have certifications now. We have people who do different specialties within accessibility. None of that was true 10 years ago. So there's been a huge growth. There's also, I think, a lot of commitment and passion coming from the next generation. In fact, one of the things that's kind of bubbling up as an idea right now is that there be kind of an accessibility eldering project where there's some mentorship that people of my generation might be able to provide to folks who are getting into this or exploring what they could do in accessibility. So we're excited about that. There's some initiative underway with folks like Lainey Feingold and Sharon Rush and some other colleagues to try to stand up something like a mentorship program.
No, that's very cool. I know we don't have a official mentor program, you and I, but you have been a guide for me throughout this whole journey of me getting into the accessibility space and building our team. And I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for me and my journey. And for people who are interested in getting in touch with you, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Sure. They can reach out to me. My email is Lori, LORI.Samuels, SAMUELS, at NBCUni.com. So that's NBCUni.com. And I'm happy to talk to folks, and particularly people who are kind of interested in the field.
And I'm just thankful for you to participate today and just be here with me. And I really appreciate everything you do, Lori.